When I was in the eighth grade, this was during the height of the war against drug era. And a friend of mine, I call him my brother, we were walking down the street, and they used to have what they call DTs, or undercover cops, and they would drive in cars that they would confiscate from drug deals, so you wouldn't know that there was a cop or what have you. Similar to what was happening now in certain states. They didn't have masks on, but they were dressed like us, and they didn't reveal their badges or anything like that. And me and my friend, he was in the seventh grade, and we were in school together all day. And this car jumps onto the sidewalk. And you got to remember that at this time, you don't know
I was probably
it.
alive.
If you lived through the war against drugs era, there
Yeah.
was a lot. It was high violence. Our posture, if a car comes or somebody aggressively moves towards us, was defense mechanism. It was to run or to, and it was police, and they pulled out their badges, were very aggressive. They took my friend to jail because he had on a hat that mirrored a hat that somebody else did something in. And I'm like, we just came from school. We were kids. We weren't. I just turned a teenager, and he wasn't even a teenager yet. He was bigger than me. I was always a little small, and he lost the case. And they threw my testimony out. They threw his teacher testimony out, and his mom paid for a lawyer, but the lawyer that she paid for wasn't a good defense lawyer. But for our town and our community, just having to pay for a lawyer, just somebody to advocate for you. And the system failed that day. And my friend got on probation and had a record for the rest of his life for something that he didn't do, but something changed in him. And now he began to live out the role that was labeled towards him. This conversation today is going to be centered around advocates and why having avocation is important. And this is, even if you're a small business owner, to be bullied by the IRS or by bigger companies, price gouging or whatever it is, you need an advocate. You need somebody that's going to be able to stand up for you, that knows the law, knows the rules and the regulations, and that will fight for you. So don't think that this is not for you, that this is just about social justice or anything like that, because it's far from that. It's just really about who can you get to stand in the gap when it's needed most. I just woke up to a news report that Don Lemon was arrested for covering a protest. This is the day that we're living in, and Don Lemon will have counsel. He's going to have public support, but sometimes the little person, the little guy, doesn't have that type of context, doesn't have that kind of support. But today, you're going to learn how you can go about finding avocation, especially in certain crucial areas. My name is NaRon Tillman. This is Walk in Victory, where we sit you at the feet of the masters, have conversations to help you evolve your life, create new neural pathways, new ways of thinking, new ways of approaching. And every time we have these conversations, we like to come away with some takeaways. So get your notebook out, get ready to write, and we're going to talk everything advocacy with our guest, Niran. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having
No,
me.
thank you for joining us. So, if you hear the word advocacy, what jumps out to you?
It's interesting. I have always shied away from that word because I'm supposed to be neutral when I go in and look at legal cases. And you can't do this work. Like my eyes have been opened in a way they never understood the legal system before. And even as you were telling that story, I'm a pediatrician, right? So I think about kids. And if you'd told that story to me maybe 7 years ago, I might have thought differently about your friend, and not thought differently, but been like, maybe he did something, right? Because they wouldn't grab him otherwise. And that perspective is completely flipped the other direction. 75% of the families that, or parents that I help defend, are people of color or marginalized population, or like you said, the quote, little guys or poor folks who've otherwise just haven't had an advocate. And I think everybody needs help because what started out as a legal system that was grounded in justice and equality has really shifted in the last many years. I don't exactly know when it started, but obviously we're seeing it every single day play out on our streets and in our country.
Yeah, we're living in a really, I would call, strange time. But strange times bring about great conversations, and they bring about transformation. I know some people seem as if we're regressing, but what is really happening is that the system is being seen for what it is. It's not a regression. It's always been there, but now it's in the forefront. And now we can really have honest and true conversation without, as you so clearly stated, at one point you would be like, no, that ain't happening. It's in your head. So let's talk about your journey. How did we arrive here from where we were? And you were very, again, clear about where you stood before and where you're standing now. And we'll even remove the word advocate because that word can sound loosely guarded, right? So somebody needs something and we don't hand down, we just do our part. So let's give our audience a working word that you would like to use and how do you view what it is that you do and your journey.
I don't know if you're going to love this word, but
Yeah.
scientist, truth teller, right? Facts, looking grounded in facts. And really that's how I view my job is I look at the facts. What did we see? What evidence do we have? What information is irrefutable? And then what can we do with that information? So I really think of it as just like a second look with an open mind and grounded in facts.
The
Scientist.
scientist is amazing because when people hear science, they're thinking something other, matter, atoms, neurons, neutrons, and all those things. But science is really just taking an introspective look at something from a truth perspective without emotional attachment, without bias, and just allowing the language of facts to speak to whatever it is that we're assessing in the moment. So we look at it from a scientific point of view. You're working with families that usually, if the label comes out, if a child says something, you have to prove yourself right. You're not innocent until proven guilty. You have to prove that innocent. Yeah.
That's what I've learned. Again, my perspective, we grow up with this idea that people are assumed innocent until proven guilty. And in this particular arena involving children, it's often the opposite. You're guilty until you're not only proven innocent, but really every last possibility is exhausted, that now you're left with innocence, which is hard.
Yeah. So let's look at in today's headline driven, click, clickbait driven social media society where the headline is big, but the retraction is small. So even if the person is found innocent and they prove their innocence, they've already been labeled guilty because we have a where there's smoke, there's fire kind of mentality. How do you go about helping your clients to understand and repair reputation after you help them usually get out of whatever jam that they're in?
It's hard because what's interesting is once you've been accused of hurting your child or abusing a child, that record is generally permanent in your medical record. And so every time a child or family goes back to, say, a children's hospital, there's many in the country, but every time they go back, whether it's for completely unrelated condition, you get a fever, you fell on the swings at the playground, child abuse is one of the number one diagnoses on your chart that's left. So the moment you walk back into that same hospital where maybe a wrongful accusation occurred, you are labeled every single time. And you can try to get that label removed, but it's very difficult. I have very few families that have been able to do it. And what they do is they just try to seek alternative forms of care. They go to different places.
So that happens even if you're found innocent? Wow.
Yes, it
Why
does,
is
even
that?
if found in.
Why is that?
I don't know. It's a great question. I don't know if the hospitals, I don't know if it's a hospital policy. I don't know why it stays with you, but it's not every hospital, right? You could go to a community hospital and that's generally not a big part of your chart. But when it's occurred at a children's hospital and you've been identified as by a doctor who has a specialty in child abuse, it stays with you and on that chart. I don't know the reason, but the families, they've shared that with me over the years that they're really afraid to go back to that same institution. Even if they've been proven innocent, it remains a label.
How did you get here? What was that journey like for you? That you're this scientist and you've mastered the art of helping people out. Your story remind me of you ever saw the show Found? It was on NBC. She,
I didn't.
oh, this is this lady. She was kidnapped as a child, so she would help families find their loved ones. After a certain amount of time, people stopped looking. So her and her team would go out and find. And because she was held captive for such a long time, she had a unique skill set in able to find the kids. But here's the kicker: her abuser, she had kidnapped him and locked him in the basement, and he would give her clues on how to find. It was sick. It was good. It was a really great show. But she was an advocate, which is what I'm saying. And how did you get to the place of advocacy?
I guess I'm thankful I never kept anyone in the basement in order to do my work. But essentially I had a family wrongly accused, and what's interesting is we had gone through just like a small bruise. This child had three the size of three matchsticks, and it was very clearly consistent with a fall. And I talked to the family about it, and they were accused wrongly, and it was opened my eyes to the fact that they might have had their child taken away if they hadn't had a pediatrician who knew them and could stand up to the prosecutor and say, hey, no, you're off base here. This is not. I actually told them I'd stake my license on the fact it wasn't abuse. That's how strongly I felt. It was such a small single bruise, like not even a broken bone, nothing that we normally associate with abuse. And it opened my eyes to the world of child abuse. And that particular accuser happened to be a doctor who has been fired. And there's been a lot of controversy in the Seattle area about that individual. But then there was this broader piece that was still going on. And the Office of Public Defense in Washington State reached out to me and asked, would you look at a few cases, providing a second opinion? And some of the things that I have found are shocking to me. Missed major medical diagnoses, a child who needs a liver transplant instead of having their mother put in jail. Things that were pretty significant as a doctor, as a scientist, that really opened my eyes. And now I work for 24 states doing this kind of second
Oh
opinion.
wow, 24
Hmm.
states. So
Yeah.
this is a broader epidemic.
Yes, I didn't know it at the time, but I am learning that. I've been doing it for 4 years, and the net kind of keeps the states and different organizations, the Innocence Project, I've done work with them, just various different organizations. That net has just broadened every year.
Why podcasts? Why? What do you feel is your mission to get the story out and to tell your not just to tell your story, but to advocate on behalf of the people that you represent and all of those things.
So, my broader message or my hope by getting this out there is simply that every family who's accused of abusing their child, every parent, every person is entitled to a second opinion. And there are different laws in different states. I'm not an attorney, but really you can seek a second opinion if you feel that you're wrongly accused or what they're telling you happened didn't happen. So again, someone who's accused has the right to defend themselves, and they have the right to a second opinion from a scientist, and that should be available to everyone. It really is available to everyone, but you have to ask. And hospitals will tell you you have to transfer your child in order to get that second opinion, and that's not true. Like I said, I work for 24 states. I live in one state. So I don't necessarily travel to do that evaluation. So I want it out there that there is someone who can look at the case and can provide a second opinion.
Usually, when a family is going through this ordeal, there's a stigmatism that comes with it. There's a shame that comes with it, so they hide it away. They'll be at Thanksgiving dinner, and most of the family members won't even know that they're going through this. How do you make the wrongly accused feel comfortable with coming forward and saying, "Hey, I didn't do this"?
A lot of parents do come forward and say that piece. They let the doctors know or let the police know, no, I didn't do this. And they keep getting told this is the only way it could have happened. And I want to remind people that if you are the parent or a teacher or someone who's been accused, you were there, you know what happened. So trust inside yourself that you know the truth, and don't be afraid to fight for yourself, to fight for your family. And you're right, there's a ton of shame attached. That's been another eye-opening thing for me, has been to watch these families share their story. And they may not share it with, say, family at Thanksgiving, like you said, because they're ashamed, but they can stand in their truth. They can talk to their attorney. Most defense attorneys are aware that people are sometimes wrongly accused, and it's not that foreign of an idea for them, and they will find someone who can do a second opinion review. That's often how I'm contacted. Sometimes families find me. There's been various articles in the Seattle Times and such about my work, but mostly it's attorneys who know where to look and know how to review who would be a good fit for them. So I would say if you have an attorney, talk to them. If you didn't do it, you didn't hurt your child, fight for yourself, fight for your child, fight for your family.
Now, when you started this with this one little family, did you think that there was an entrepreneurial side to this? And have you always been entrepreneurial? And you said no. How has this journey been? Because not only are you becoming a scientist that is really doing a great work, helping families mend their wounds, but you're also a female entrepreneur that is now recognized. Your work is recognized in 24 out of the 52. How has that been?
So my father was a pediatrician, so I took over his practice. We worked together for 16 years before he died. And so my practice is actually 55 years
Wow.
old this January. So I have run a small medical practice. I'm actually the last practice in my rural community in Washington State. And I'm hoping my children, I have 4 children, I'm hoping at least 1 or 2 of them decide to take it over. So we'll see what happens there. But starting another business just seemed to make sense. When I first started doing this, I thought, I'm a doctor, I'll just do payments and such through my practice. It's just a different service that I'm offering. And as this has expanded into more criminal defense work and work with the Innocence Project, etc., it really felt like it needed a second place. And I was really looking at, what do I actually provide? We talked about, I'm not really an advocate per se, right? I'm an open-minded scientist that wants to look at the facts and see if there's something else that could have happened to the child. And so what I'm really doing is a time-honored medical tradition that is highly respected, which is providing a second opinion, right? 2 heads are always better than one. 5 heads are better than two. And what I'm really doing is just taking another look with an open mind and looking at the science, looking at the facts, and seeing, is there another cause? And often there is another cause of what is going on with the child, and that diagnosis can even help improve the child's life. It often does.
Because when we talked about the shame on behalf of the parent, where the passive participant is the child, and the child
Yes,
now has to see their parents going through this disharmony in the household. A lot of times they may be stripped away from the family, and
correct. They're
and
taken.
and the child now has to carry the burden of this. My mom and my dad separated when we was at an early age, and I carried the burden like as if it was my fault. It was their. I'm an adult now, I understand, but as a child, I was carrying that burden, and we have these youth and young adults that may be carrying the burden. As one who understands and looks at the facts, how do you think that you've been working with children for a long time? How does that play out for a youth, a young adult, and do we see the residue of that as they grow into adolescent, into adulthood?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I have actually followed a lot of the families that I've helped reunite because, as you might imagine, they don't really feel safe going back to that same hospital or back to the same pediatrician who might have mistakenly reported them. So sometimes people drive 2, 3, even 5 hours to have
Wow.
their primary care with me. And I don't normally take new patients. I'm very full. It's old practice, but I will take these families. And so I've been able to follow them now. That original family, I think, was about 6 years ago. So I've got a good 5 years of following these families after they're reunited. And the fear, the hardest part to watch is the fear of every parent that with every fall, with every,
Mm.
stumble, they're really they living in fear. There's so much trauma associated with having your children taken away from you, especially when it's a wrong accusation, that you live in fear. And so the child feels that fear. And sometimes we have to talk through it a bit and say, look, this is what we do when there's an injury, or this is what we do when something happens. Come here, we'll talk about it. And it involves talking to the child because the child really, like you just said, they're great listeners, poor interpreters as children. Meaning, like you said, your parents separated, but you thought it was your fault. And the thing is, so they don't interpret what's happening all the time in this adult context. And so we really have to spend time talking through that trauma because when you're watching your parent be afraid, what do you think a young child feels? They feel that fear. That's the last thing you ever want to see. And some of these families are afraid to even have another child
Mm.
because they don't want to be separated again. And it's something they're going to live with for many years. To be honest with you, I don't have all the answers, but we're working on it. And I think talking, communicating, identifying it, it's really almost it is trauma, but it's almost a type of PTSD where the parent is so fearful to go in when something's wrong with their child because they've been through that and they're just afraid it's going to happen again.
When your case is put before you and you start to go through the files, and I know, as you said, there's a science behind it, and you have your secret sauce, and you know what you're looking for, all of those things. How long can you sniff out with your BS meter? Oh, this person did it, and oh, I really need to dive in a little bit deeper.
So usually within an hour or two of reading records, you can tell. And I get cases that are vetted by attorneys, defense attorneys for the most part, who have a really good what you'd call BS meter. I've been so impressed with the attorneys across the country. And occasionally I will, so 40% of the cases are correct, let's say, and roughly 60% are wrongful diagnosis or an error. And so I can usually tell that 40% pretty quickly. Sometimes the crimes are obviously horrific or the cause of death is horrific. And then sometimes there's just something doesn't make sense and it's just that kind of gut feeling. So I'll dive in a little more. And usually that kind of initial gut feeling, both of the attorney and myself tend to be pretty accurate. There's some surprises here and there, and that's why the science, I really try to stick to the facts. But it's been really, it's great learning as a doctor, and it's just great learning as a parent and a human, and I can usually tell pretty quickly.
If you're in baseball and you got to hit 60% of the time, you're a damn good baseball player.
That's how I'm looking at it too.
So, this is a real problem, one that's not going away. And on the flip side of it, we do know that children do get abused.
Absolutely.
And no one is going to stand up. The bad actor is not going to say I did it. We all lean in with the it wasn't me, shaggy response. How do you navigate through that? Let's say, case in point, if you've been practicing with kids and when you see a sign, what are some of the signs that you look for in abuse victims?
So, as a general pediatrician, the red flags tend to be a delay in care. So, someone who says, oh gosh, my child's been limping or complaining of pain for a week before we came in, right? So delay in care has been really statistically proven to be a red flag. A changing story. So you start with X story, and by the time you get done, you've changed it enough that it's completely transformed. Or two adults that are maybe in the home and they both have different stories. They were both there, but they both have completely different stories. Something that just makes your kind of question meter go off. And then what's interesting is in that 40%, for the pediatrician anyway, it's a little bit of a gut instinct. Sometimes the defense attorneys will get frustrated with me and say, I think you were too harsh on your report or your opinion with this person. And I will say, I understand where you're coming from, but there's enough red flags here. My job is the child. That's always and forevermore going
Hmm.
to be my, no matter what, whether I like like the person or not, has nothing to do with it. It's, is this child safe in this situation? And sometimes even what looks like a safe situation at first, when you really delve in and they're not sending them to school, they're not making sure, that they've got a protective adult or whatever the story is, right? Versus sometimes it's, I sent them to school in tights that are not see-through, right? Like tights that are opaque and no pants, and they'll get pulled from a home. And I'm like, wait a second, this is a dad who maybe doesn't understand fashion in young girls and didn't really realize the difference. That's less concerning versus the child walks 2 miles to school in the morning in the dark and they're in elementary school and nobody's following through. That puts the child's life at risk. So a lot of these are really subtle differences. And that's what I tease out as much as possible. Is the child safe or not? And so there's been surprises on both sides, but I really push the attorneys, the defense attorneys, to say, we need eyes and ears on this child or this family. You may want them reunited. Maybe the state's already done that, but I'm still worried and I still want eyes on this kid. I want evaluations on the parents. So again, I find myself doing both things and I use those red flags to help guide my workup and
I'm
recommendations.
glad that you mentioned something because you sound like someone that's going to lay it straight. Where you say even sometimes the lawyer is saying, "Hey, I think you're a bit too harsh in your assessments and stuff as such." Why is it important for you to use clear language, to use strong language when it needs to be strong, to use passive language when it needs to be passive, as you do your science work?
I think communication is a huge part of this job. Not only am I communicating with the defense attorneys, sometimes when a parent doesn't understand how maybe they have not done the best job they could,
Hmm.
I get on and meet with them too. And I try to explain what my concern is and the reason something needs to change, or the reason they really need to evaluate their own trauma, maybe as a parent, as a child themselves, saying, look, something's not right here. And it doesn't mean you're not what's not right. It may be your own history that you haven't processed. And I need you to do that to be strong for your own child. So there's this piece of, it's not necessarily that the parent is a bad person even. They've just had their own trauma that isn't worked out yet, and that's my job, to see some of that and to say, hey, how can we put this family back together safely? And so communication's part of the job with the parents, with the attorneys, and then even in court with the judges, who I have found judges across the country to be phenomenal at their job. I'm glad I don't have their job, but they have to tease out facts. And so communication is so important. And even the judges will ask me questions sometimes, and I'll go back and really break down the science and explain why I've reached this conclusion. So I write, I have an opinion column actually in our local paper for the past, I guess it's coming up on 9 years now. And I've learned to communicate better. I get to write about whatever I want, whatever's going on in the world. I get to write about, whether it's racism or school violence or you name it, education, COVID. I've written about it, and that has really built my skills. I think, to improve like clear communication, because I'm trying to take a science and break it down so
Can
everyone can
understand.
understand it, whether you're a parent,
Right.
attorney, or judge.
So, last question, and this was very eye opening and thought provoking. How has neuroscience impacted the work that you do, the growth in neuroscience, and all of the things that are happening around us and accelerating at a really swift pace? Whereas some years before, we looked at let's say, a child that was faced with that kind of dilemma, and they would say, oh, that child, after a certain age, that's just who they're going to be. But now we're seeing that the brain is pliable and it actually can continue to grow and it can create new neural pathways. And that doesn't, just because that was a part of the journey, it doesn't have to be their story. How has neuroscience helped you become the scientist that helps out so many people and better your work?
So it's a great question. Basically, when I went through med school, which was a long time ago, before the turn of the century, as a matter of fact, essentially we believe the brain really made all those connections and lost what's called plasticity, which is that idea it can shift and grow. We believed it lost a lot of its plasticity around 6.
Mm,
And while there is still some of that, we now talk more about the fact that the female brain is still growing and changing through at least early 20s. And for the male brain, we're talking, mid to late 20s even. And that piece is so valuable and important because we now talk about how much damage trauma does, the loss of parents, violence in the home, violence in public, in the world, so many elements that children will carry with them through their childhood into adulthood, and how that impacts addiction and decision making and so many pieces of who they are. And I think the way we've now got more knowledge, we can now do better, right? We know better, we can do better. And by doing that, we have a real opportunity to intervene in families that have a history of trauma, in children who have experienced trauma, and even in adults who have trauma. We can regulate nervous systems in a way we've never really understood. Some people think it's a little woo woo and a little less science, but I think there's really good science behind it, and we should always stay open to the reality that people can change, people can grow. And a lot of people who've, like you said, walked in victory. I love the name of your podcast. People, when they've been able to advocate for themselves or had someone believe them or stand up and learn from that process, they're often the best advocates they could ever be in the world. And then they reach what they're supposed to do and what they're meant to do. Some of the parents who've been wrongly accused are nurses or other healthcare professionals, and they become advocates. And some of the parents become advocates themselves. Some are attorneys. Some are paralegals who become attorneys. And you know what? Using their experience to help others, I think, is the most beautiful thing in the whole experience of being involved in this work.
There you have it, everybody. I told you we only set you at the feet of the best. We give you the best information. I believe that there are some nuggets that someone who's listening may have family member that needs to be advocated for. Don't stop fighting. And I know it's difficult because we fight from the stream down trying to go upstream, and that's hard when the currents are coming and the attacks are coming, and the internal self-talk that we have within ourselves. Sometimes you can know that you're innocent, and then you start to talk to yourself as if you're guilty because everybody else is saying that you're guilty, and it happens. I've been there, not with this, but in other situations. We've all felt like, all right, what could I have done to avoid this? And then there's certain things that happens in life that are unavoidable. Children will fall. We're living in a strange world. When I was coming up, my mother beat me. So now we can't even touch our children, so to say. So it's just the time that we're living in, and let's just all take a deep breath, slow down, line your ducks in a row, and walk in victory. All of NaRon's information is in the description. So if you need guidance, I'm pretty on her social media and all of that stuff. And you can even though she's on the other side of the country, from wherever she is, you can still read her pieces. And we want to support our guests. And this message is important, not just from an entrepreneurial side, but from a side of knowing that there is someone that cares. There is someone that is willing to sit down and scientifically go through your story. Now, if you BSing, she will find out.
I will.
And she's going to tell it like it is. So we don't walk with failed excuses. We know that the victory journey is just that, a journey, and the journey has highs and it has lows. But we walk in victory nonetheless. Don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe. Your likes, your shares, your subscriptions helps get these conversations to the ears of the people that need it. We don't ask you for Cash Apps or Venmos or any of those things, but we do ask that you support our guests and that you support the show. Enjoy the rest of your day. Don't walk with your head down. Don't walk making excuses. You know what we do. We walk in victory, and NaRon is now a part of the Walk in Victory family. Enjoy. Peace.